I came home from work on a Tuesday afternoon, and my backyard was gone. Not gone like empty, gone like replaced. There was a swing set where my garden used to be, a slide where my patio furniture used to sit, a sandbox in the corner where I had planted roses the spring my mother passed away, and a sign, bolted to my own back fence. Palmetto Ridge Community Playground, maintained by your HOA. I stood at my back door for a long time, and then I went inside, and I made a decision that would take 2 years, and cost the HOA everything they had. Before this story goes any further, and I need you to understand, it goes much further. Welcome to HOA Gone Too Far. This channel exists for every person who has ever come home and found something taken from them, something they built, something they planted, something that meant more than just property. Hit subscribe right now. Ring that bell, because we tell stories like this every single week, and you do not want to miss a single one. Some houses are just houses, 4 walls, a roof, a place to sleep and eat and store your things. You live there for a while, and then you move on, and you don't carry much of it with you. And then there are the other kind, the kind that get into you, the kind where every room has a memory attached to it, and every corner of the yard has a story, and when you sit on the back porch on a quiet evening, you feel something that is very hard to name, but that you know with complete certainty you would do almost anything to protect. My house was the second kind. I bought it 8 years ago, 2 months after my mother died. I want to be upfront about that, because it matters to everything that follows. I was 34 years old, and I had just lost the person who had been the center of my world since the day I was born, and I was standing in an empty house for the first time in my life, and I needed something to hold on to. I found this house almost by accident, a corner lot in a planned community outside the city. 3 bedrooms, a small front yard, and a backyard that was larger than anything I had expected. Deep and wide, backing up to a wooden fence, with a mature oak tree in the far left corner that had probably been there for 50 years. When I walked into that backyard on the day of the viewing, I stood under that oak tree, and I thought about my mother. She had loved gardens. She had kept one her entire life. Tomatoes and roses and whatever herbs were in season, tended every morning before work, every evening after dinner. I bought the house, and in the spring of that first year, I planted roses along the back fence. The same variety my mother had always grown, pale pink, almost white in certain light. She had called them her quiet flowers. I planted them in the corner where she would have put them if this yard had been hers. That garden became the reason I came home. Over 8 years, I added to it steadily. A patio with a small table and 2 chairs, one for me and one for whoever happened to be visiting. A raised vegetable bed along the south fence that produced tomatoes every summer that I genuinely could not stop eating. Climbing jasmine on the back fence that bloomed every June and filled the whole yard with a smell that I cannot describe to you, except to say that it made everything feel temporarily okay. The HOA had been a present since the day I moved in. Not a hostile one, not at first. The standard welcome packet, the dues notice, the occasional newsletter with cheerful updates about community initiatives and upcoming events. The president when I moved in was a quiet man named Harold who did the job the way a good HOA president does the job. Invisibly, Harold retired after 2 years and moved to be closer to his daughter in another state. His replacement was a woman named Sandra. Sandra was 50 years old and had been on the HOA board for 3 years before becoming president. She had strong opinions about the neighborhood's aesthetic direction, a detailed vision for what the community should look and feel like, and the specific energy of a person who has been waiting for authority for a long time and intends to use every bit of it. In her first year as president, Sandra launched what she called the Community Enhancement Initiative, new signage at the neighborhood entrance, upgraded landscaping in the common areas, a newsletter redesign, a proposal for a new community gathering space, something she described as a place where families could connect, children could play, and the neighborhood could feel like a true community. It all sounded reasonable. It all sounded, honestly, quite good. What nobody realized, what I did not realize, because I was working long hours and paying my dues on time, and assuming the people running the neighborhood understood the most basic difference between common property and private property, was what Sandra had already decided that gathering space would be, and where she had already decided to put it. The first sign that something was wrong came on a Monday morning in October, when I found a note tucked under my front door. Not mailed, hand-delivered, printed on HOA letterhead. It informed me that following review of the neighborhood's original development survey, the HOA had determined that the rear portion of my lot, specifically the back 40 feet of my backyard, running the full width of the property, had been designated in the original 1998 development plan as a community green space easement. The letter said this designation had simply never been formally activated. Until now, it said the HOA intended to proceed with development of the space as a community playground. It gave me 30 days to remove any personal property from the affected area. I read it twice, standing in my hallway in my work clothes with my coffee going cold. The affected area was my rose garden. I did not panic. I want to be honest about that, because I think it matters. My first instinct when I read that letter was not fear. It was not even anger. It was something colder and more focused than either of those things. It was a feeling of someone who knows in their bones that something is wrong and who intends to prove it. I called in late to work that morning, sat down at my kitchen table with my property documents, the deed, the title insurance policy, the survey that had been conducted when I purchased the house, and I read through every word of every one of them. My deed described my lot boundaries with complete precision. The rear boundary of my property was the back fence. My property extended to that fence. There was no notation of any easement, no reference to any community green space designation, no carve-out of any kind. The back 40 feet of my yard was mine. I photographed every relevant page of every document. Then I called a real estate attorney named Patricia Marsh, whose name I had found through a referral from a colleague who had used her for a boundary dispute 2 years earlier. Patricia answered her own phone. I described the situation in as much detail as I could. She was quiet for a moment when I finished. "Do you have the original survey from your purchase?" she asked. "Yes," I said, "and there is no easement notation on it." "Nothing," I said. "Send me everything," she said. "The letter, your deed, your survey, and your title insurance policy. I will call you tomorrow morning." She called the next morning at 8:15. "I have reviewed everything," she said, "and I want to walk you through what I found, because the HOA's claim has a significant problem." The significant problem was this. Patricia had obtained a copy of the 1998 development plan the HOA had referenced in their letter. The plan did show a designated community green space in the original neighborhood layout, but the location of that green space was not my backyard. It was a parcel on the opposite side of the development, a strip of land that had been incorporated into the community's main common area in 2003, when the final phase of construction was completed. The green space designation had already been used. It had been fulfilled. It no longer existed as an outstanding claim on any private lot in the neighborhood. Sandra's letter had either misread the 1998 plan or had deliberately misrepresented it. Patricia was careful about which of those two possibilities she stated directly, but the effect was the same either way. The legal basis for the HOA's claim on my backyard did not exist. "What do we do?" I asked. "We respond formally," Patricia said. "A letter from my office to the HOA board, laying out the actual history of the 1998 designation and making clear that any development of your backyard without your consent would constitute trespass and property damage. We give them an opportunity to withdraw the claim before this becomes something larger. And if they don't draw," Patricia was quiet for just a moment, "then we make it something larger." The letter went out that Friday. Certified mail. Return receipt requested. Addressed to Sandra Cole, HOA president, and to every member of the board by name. It was thorough. It was documented. It cited the 1998 plan specifically, explained its actual history, and made absolutely clear that the lot in question was private property with no outstanding easement of any kind, and that the HOA had no legal authority to develop it. We received a response 11 days later. Sandra had found a different attorney, and that attorney had found a different interpretation of the 1998 plan, one that reading it from a certain angle, in a certain light, could be construed to suggest that the green space designation had not been entirely resolved by the 2003 Common Area Incorporation. It was not a strong interpretation. Patricia described it to me as creative, but it was an interpretation, and Sandra was clearly prepared to use it. The letter informed us that the HOA intended to proceed with the Community Enhancement Initiative, that the playground development would begin within 60 days, and that if I wished to contest the designation, I was welcome to do so through the appropriate legal channels. The appropriate legal channels. While they built a playground in my backyard. I called Patricia that afternoon. They're not backing down. I told her. I know, she said. So what do we do? We get ready, she said simply, and we document everything from this point forward. Every interaction, every letter, everything they do on or near your property. Everything. I spent that weekend reviewing my property documents one more time, and as I sat in my backyard in the late afternoon, looking at the rose garden along the back fence, I made myself a quiet, private promise. They were not touching that garden. I want to tell you about the Tuesday, not the legal process, not the documents, not the letters back and forth between attorneys. I will get to all of that. But first I need to tell you about the Tuesday, because the Tuesday is the part of the story that I cannot tell without feeling it all over again. It was a regular workday. I left the house at 7:30 in the morning the way I always did. I did not look at the backyard when I left. There was no reason to. Patricia had filed for a temporary restraining order the previous week, a legal measure to prevent the HOA from taking any action on my property while the underlying dispute was being litigated. We were waiting on the court's response. Everything was, as far as I knew, paused. It was not paused. I came home at 5:45 in the afternoon, parked in the driveway, walked to the front door, noticed nothing unusual from the front of the house. I went inside, put my bag down, changed out my work clothes, and then I walked through the kitchen to the back door the way I always did, to check the garden, to sit for a few minutes before starting dinner, to just breathe for a moment at the end of the day. I opened the back door, and I stood there. I could not have told you how long I stood there. It might have been 30 seconds. It might have been 5 minutes. Time does something strange in moments like that. It either speeds up completely or stops working altogether. My patio table and chairs were gone. The raised vegetable bed along the south fence was gone. Not moved, gone. Torn out. The soil turned over and smooth flat as if it had never been there. The jasmine on the back fence was gone. 8 years of growth. Torn down. And where my rose garden had been, where I had planted those pale pink roses in the spring after my mother died, there was a sandbox, bright yellow, brand new, still had the plastic wrapping partially attached to one of the corners. A swing set stood in the center of the yard. 2 swings and a small slide, brightly colored, the kind of thing that is designed to look cheerful. It did not look cheerful to me. I walked to the back fence, to the corner where the roses had been. The soil had been dug up and smoothed over. There were no roots left, no stems, nothing. Whatever had been planted there had been removed completely. Not transplanted, not preserved, just removed. And on my back fence, my fence that I had stained myself 3 summers ago, there was a sign, laminated, professionally printed, bolted through the wood with 4 metal bolts. Palmetto Ridge Community Playground, open to all residents. Maintained by your HOA. Sandra, co-president. I read it once. I turned around and looked at the yard. I turned back and read it again. Then I went inside, sat at my kitchen table, and did not move for a very long time. I am not going to tell you I did not cry. I did. Not for the patio. Not for the vegetable bed. Not even for the jasmine, which had taken 8 years to grow that thick, and that green along the back fence. I cried for the roses, because they were not just roses. You already know what they were. And the people who tore them out did not know and did not care, and had never for one single moment considered that the yard they had decided to turn into a community amenity might contain something that could not be replaced. When I stopped crying, I called Patricia. It was 6:30 in the evening. She answered. They built it, I said. A long pause on the line. Tell me everything, she said. I described every detail. The swing set, the slide, the sandbox where the roses had been, the sign bolted to my fence. Patricia was quiet the whole time, taking notes. When I finished, she said, "Get your phone. Document everything tonight. Every bolt, every piece of equipment, every inch of that sign. We're going to need it all." "Patricia," I said, "they went ahead while the restraining order was pending. Does that mean what I think it means?" Another pause. "It means," she said, "that they just made this significantly worse of themselves. Much, much worse. I need to stop here for a second, because I know what you're feeling right now. I know, because I felt it too, standing in that yard. That specific kind of fury that comes when someone takes something that meant more than they could ever understand. If you are watching HOA Gone Too Far for the first time, please subscribe right now, because what Sandra did next, and what happened to her because of it, is exactly why this channel exists. Subscribe. Ring the bell. Stay with me. The restraining order had been granted. That is the detail that changes everything. Patricia had filed for the temporary restraining order on a Thursday. The court had granted it on the following Monday. The order was in effect as of Monday afternoon, requiring the HOA to cease all activity related to the backyard development pending resolution of the property boundary dispute. The HOA had built the playground on Tuesday, one day after a court order told them not to. I want you to understand what that means legally, because Patricia explained it to me very carefully that evening, and I think it is important. Violating a court order, proceeding with an action that a judge has specifically and explicitly prohibited, is not a civil matter. It is contempt of court. It carries a possibility of fines, sanctions, and in serious cases, consequences for the individuals involved personally, not just the organization. Sandra had not just trespassed on my property. She had not just destroyed my garden. She had looked at a court order, a document signed by a judge, and decided that her community enhancement initiative was more important. That decision was the most expensive one she ever made. Patricia filed a contempt motion the following morning. She also filed an amended complaint adding property destruction to the original trespass claim, citing the specific damage to the rose garden, the vegetable bed, the jasmine, and the patio furniture, all of which she had documented from my photographs, and which she was prepared to have assessed by a professional property damages appraiser. The court's response to the contempt filing was swift. An emergency hearing was scheduled for the following week. Sandra appeared with her attorney. Patricia appeared with me, with photographs, with a timeline of the restraining order, and with precise account of what had been done to my property in the 24 hours following the court's order. The judge was not warm about it. I will not pretend to remember the exact words, but the tone was unmistakable. The tone of someone who takes the violation court orders very seriously and who wanted it understood, clearly and on the record, that the HOA's action had not been a misunderstanding or an administrative error, but a deliberate choice made in full knowledge of the order's existence. The HOA was sanctioned, financially, significantly. The sanctions were calculated based on the scope of the violation and the evidence that the development had been organized and executed by HOA leadership with awareness of the pending restraining order. Sandra's personal attorney costs were not covered by the HOA's insurance. That detail matters. It meant that the financial consequences of the contempt finding landed on the HOA's operating funds. Funds collected from all 210 homeowners in the community through their annual dues. And that is when the second problem emerged. Because when homeowners started asking questions about where the money was going, the answers they received did not add up. A group of residents, galvanized by what had happened to my backyard and by the sudden appearance of HOA sanctions in the community's financial picture, filed a formal request for a complete financial audit of the association's accounts. Under state law, they were entitled to it. The HOA had to comply. The audit took 6 weeks. The firm that conducted it was independent, licensed, and thorough in a way that independent licensed auditors are thorough when they have been hired by homeowners who already suspect something is wrong. What they found was not one problem. It was several. The Community Enhancement Initiative, the same initiative that had produced the playground in my backyard, had been budgeted at $18,000. The actual expenditure on equipment, installation, and related costs was documented at $11,000. The remaining $7,000 was categorized as administrative and coordination expenses with documentation that the auditors described as insufficient. There were other irregularities. A landscaping contract that had been renewed for 3 consecutive years without the competitive bidding process required by the HOA's own governing documents. A vendor for community event supplies whose invoices showed billing rates significantly above market rate and whose business registration, when checked, showed an address that matched the home address of Sandra's husband. Sandra's husband, running a vendor company billing the HOA at above market rates. Awarded contracts without competitive bidding for 3 consecutive years. Patricia read the audit report on a Saturday morning and called me before noon. The property case was already strong, she said, but this changes the scale of what we're dealing with. Are you prepared for this to become something larger? Yes, I said. Then I am going to make some additional calls on Monday, she said. Those calls went to the state's HOA regulatory office, and to the county prosecutor's office, and to every homeowner in the community who had asked her through the resident group whether they had grounds to act. They did. The legal process that followed was not quick. I want to be honest about that, because I think stories like this sometimes get told in a way that makes it sound like justice arrives fast and clean and all at once. It does not. It arrives in pieces, over months, through a process that is exhausting and expensive, and that requires you to keep going on days when keeping going is the last thing you feel capable of. The contempt sanctions were upheld on appeal. Sandra's attorney had argued that the HOA had not received proper notice of the restraining order before the construction began. The court found that argument insufficient, given the documented timeline, which showed the order had been served on the HOA's registered agent 2 full days before the playground was installed. 2 days. They had known. They had proceeded anyway. The property damage claim went through a formal appraisal process. The appraiser, a licensed professional Patricia had worked with before, assessed the destruction of the rose garden, the vegetable bed, the jasmine, and the removal of the patio furniture. The total damages figure, including the cost of restoration to the yard's original condition, came to just over $22,000. Patricia had argued for a multiplier on the rose garden specifically, given the circumstances under which they had been planted and the nature of what had been destroyed. The HOA's attorney objected. The matter was resolved in mediation. I will not tell you the final number, but I will tell you it was fair. The audit findings produced a separate proceeding. The state regulatory office opened a formal investigation into the HOA's financial management practices. Sandra's husband's vendor company was identified as a related party transaction that had never been disclosed to the board as required by the association's conflict of interest policy. Sandra resigned from the board presidency on a Wednesday afternoon. Her resignation letter was 3 sentences. It said she was stepping down to focus on personal matters. It expressed gratitude for the opportunity to serve the community. It did not acknowledge any of what the audit had found or what the legal proceedings had produced. I read it sitting at my kitchen table and felt very little. Not satisfaction, not relief, just a kind of quiet acknowledgement that it was over. Almost. The playground equipment was removed from my backyard by a contractor hired by the HOA as part of the settlement. It took 2 days. They worked carefully and they left the yard as clean and level as they could. The sign came off the fence on the first afternoon. The worker who removed it offered to patch the bolt holes. I told him to leave them. I had my own plans for the fence. The new HOA president was a man named Robert Chun. Robert had been a resident for 6 years and had joined the board specifically because of what had happened to my backyard. He called me the week after his election, and the conversation was short and direct. I want you to know that the board has retained a property attorney to review the governing documents, he said. And we have established a formal conflict of interest policy that requires disclosure of any related party relationships before any vendor contract is approved. Thank you, I said. I also want to say, he said, and his voice shifted slightly, that what was done to your garden was wrong. Not just legally. It was wrong. And I am sorry it happened in this community. I did not say anything for a moment. Thank you for that, I said. That means more than you know. I replanted the roses in November. Same variety. Same corner. I had kept one single cutting that I had taken from the original plants 2 weeks before the playground was installed. On a day when something in me had felt uneasy enough to want to preserve what I could, I had kept it in a pot on my kitchen windowsill through all of it, through the contempt hearing, and the audit, and the mediation, and the resignation. It had survived, small and stubborn in its pot, putting out new growth through the winter, refusing to quit. I planted it back in November, in the same corner, in the same soil, patched the bolt holes in the fence with what that matched as closely as I could find. Replanted the jasmine starts along the fence line. They will take years to grow back to what they were. I know that. I am not impatient about it. Some things take time. The right kind of time, slow and steady and quiet. The way things grow when they are planted and ground that belongs to them, and nobody's gonna take it away. My backyard is mine. The oak tree is still there. The patio table is back with 2 chairs. The vegetable bed is coming back along the south fence. And in the far corner, where the sandbox was, where a bright yellow plastic thing sat on top of everything my mother loved, there is a small pale pink rose, just beginning. Before you go, I have one question for you, and I want you to really sit with it before you answer. If you came home one day and found that something had been built on your property, something you never agreed to, something that destroyed what you had planted there, what would the very first thing you did be? Not the legal move, not the smart move, the first thing, the human thing. Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if you have ever had something taken from you, that meant more than just property. I especially want to hear from you. There's a small pale pink rose growing in my backyard right now. It does not know what happened to the ones that came before it. It is just growing. The way things grow when the ground is finally safe again. If this story stayed with you, if it made you feel something real, subscribe to HOA Gone Too Far right now. Every week, we tell stories like this one. Stories about people who refused to let go of what was theirs. Stories about property and rights. And the things that mean more than both. Hit subscribe. Ring that bell. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Thank you for being here. I will see you in the next one.